I'm Matthew, and I'm going to be talking to you about how pigeons can kill you. Which, to be clear, the pigeons themselves are not coming down, swooping and killing people. What they're actually doing is causing an allergic reaction within your lungs, which can eventually develop into scarring. The scarring makes it hard for you to breathe, and eventually that is what's killing you. So this allergic reaction, I'll go into all this in a bit more detail in a minute. This allergic reaction is actually really hard to detect because everybody reacts to what they're breathing in differently, and they're all reacting to different things. So one of the things is pigeon dander, but as we saw in there, pigeons, bagpipes and e-cigarettes. I'll get onto all three. So what we did was we used a population of pigeon keepers who are keeping pigeons and are therefore at high risk of developing this allergy, to see if we could use a blood test to see if they were having the reaction before they would come to a doctor. And it actually, from our results, looks like we can. So what am I actually talking about? I'm talking about these reactions, but it's not just pigeons. It can be a wide range of things. It's been known as farmer's lung in farming communities, pigeon lung in the pigeon keeping community, once known as humidifier lung. It's quite common in industrial and kind of chemical-based industries. But one you might have actually heard of is bagpipe lung. So this was a few years ago. Back in 2014, a man sadly died after experiencing some progressive breathlessness and an inability to do his daily tasks. And at the time, doctors knew that he was having this scarring in his lungs, but they didn't know what was causing it. And it wasn't until 2 years later in 2016 that they actually found that it was from a mold inside of his bagpipes. Now, I don't know much about bagpipes, so I don't know if he wasn't cleaning them or if that's common inside bagpipes, but that's what they found. And he would have just otherwise been having some kind of very flu-like symptoms every so often before this happened, the scarring. So the scarring actually makes it hard for you to breathe in two ways. It kind of physically clogs up your lungs, and it means that they can't stretch out as much, and it makes it actually physically harder for you to open them up and get the air in. It also just kind of stops the air getting to where it needs to go once it's inside your lungs. It acts as an actual barrier. So it affects around 3,000 people in England alone every year. And that number is actually on the rise, and we're not quite sure why. Once it reaches this stage, it is irreversible. We can't treat it. There are some treatments that can slow it down and can ease symptoms, but eventually within 5 years, most people who are diagnosed with this will have sadly died. It can be caused by several different things, but the most often explanation is that we don't know what's causing it. It's unexplained, and the technical word for that is idiopathic. But one of the more common causes is an allergy. So, what is an allergy? Some of you may know, some of you may not. It's an overreaction of your immune system to something, in this case, that you breathe in, most often a fungus or some kind of mold. So in this type of reaction, it just causes long-term inflammation, and that's what causes the scarring. So I'm sure your mothers will have all told you not to pick at scabs, because if you pick a scab, you'll get a scar. And that's exactly the same reaction that's happening. It's just happening all throughout your lungs, is that it's constantly being irritated, and your immune system just doesn't know what to do, and it just deposits scar tissue. But while it's just an allergic reaction, it is reversible. All you need to do is stay away from whatever it is that's causing it. Stay away from the pigeons, stop playing your bagpipes, or clean them, and that's it. It'll go away. But the problem is, what I mentioned earlier, there's such a diverse range of reactions within what we would call this allergy. So we saw a minute ago the man with the bagpipes. He would have been playing those for years. He would have been having these kind of flu-like symptoms for years. But in this case, this was a teenager that started using e-cigarettes in around January of last year. and by November was hospitalised with some severe breathing difficulties, which in the end almost killed him. Luckily, he has recovered, and hopefully he will have stopped using e-cigarettes and will not actually suffer any of these long-term scarring consequences, because that happened too quickly. But you can see how it could be difficult for a doctor if someone can come in with, recurrent colds, essentially, or this, to try and figure out what it is that's actually going on. So, what we did is we looked at pigeon keepers, because we know that pigeon keepers are at risk of developing this allergy. So we took their blood and we gave them a questionnaire, essentially. And the questionnaire was trying to tease out whether or not they'd had the reactions that are associated with this allergy. We then used a number of tests, but the important ones are the kind of current or old test that we use just now to test if someone's having these reactions, and a new test testing a different thing in the blood that we were trying to develop. So we split them up into 3 groups. The control group are the ones with the green circles. The people who have been keeping pigeons but have never experienced these symptoms are the blue kind of downward pointing triangles, and the people who've kept pigeons and experienced reactions are the red upwards facing triangles. So, what did we find? This is the old test, and this has 2 problems. The first is that it's too specific. And what that means is that we actually have to know what it is that they're reacting to in order to test it. It's a part of the test. So in this case, you actually take some of the pigeon dander that the people have been reacting to and test the blood with it. So in the case of the guy with the bagpipes, it would be useless because it was 2 years afterwards until they actually found out what it was that he was reacting to. The second problem with it is that it can't actually tell the difference between people who are having the allergy and not, which makes it not a very good test. So trust me, we ran the numbers on these, and you can't tell the difference between the people who've never had symptoms and the people who have. So all that's really telling you is that these people kept pigeons and these people didn't. That's all you can really tell from that. But we were looking at a different thing in the blood, and this was our test. And that overcomes both of those problems. It's non-specific, so it's actually something that's produced in your body in a reaction to the allergy. And it means that no matter what it is that you're reacting to, you should get this in your blood. And the second difficulty that overcomes is that it can actually tell the difference between the 2 groups. So you can see an added line in this one, a dotted red line going across. That is a normal value. That wasn't set by us, that was set by people studying the normal. And you can see all our control subjects who've never kept pigeons are below it. Most of the people who have never experienced symptoms are below that line, and most of the people who have experienced symptoms are above it, which is quite exciting if you're looking at that sort of thing. So there are some people, as you can see, that are above the line who have never had symptoms or have never reported having symptoms, and people who have reported symptoms but are below the line. Now that could be that they have a higher level or a lower level normally. It could be that they're reacting to something else that we don't know about, or they may not have remembered that they've had the symptoms or thought that the symptoms have been something else. We just don't know at this point. But in general, you can tell the difference between the 2 groups. So what does all this mean? It means that we could, in the future, potentially have a blood test that could tell if you're having this sort of reaction well before it develops into that deadly scarring that we are seeing rise just now, which means we could potentially save lives. But part of that would be actually kind of getting the word out and getting people aware, because no one's going to go to the doctor and speak about it if they just think they've got a cold. So it's kind of visibility, hoping that people who are keeping pigeons, playing bagpipes, smoking e-cigarettes, and working in all these kind of industries where it is more common, to go and get themselves tested, or perhaps their employers could test them. We need a little more research into other areas where it might be increased. So I said a minute ago that it could be increased for other reasons or decreased for other reasons. This is just kind of the beginning, but in the future it could potentially be something as simple as a finger prick test to say, are you having this reaction or are you not, or an indication of whether you could be having this reaction or not. In conclusion, there is some kind of fatal scarring affecting around 3,000 people in England alone. That's on the rise. The previous tests have had major drawbacks that have made them almost useless. Not useless, but a lot less useful than they should be. We were looking at using a different test to detect the previous cause before the scarring, and our results suggest it could be far more effective than the previous test. So, thank you. Any questions?